Michael Suter. This is the Daimon Seed Astrology YouTube channel. I'm also on Rumble. I'll probably be on BitChute as well in the near future. So this channel has been created, I've created it in order to answer some questions about what I believe astrology really is about. This is an exploration of basic ideas of astrology and how they're applied to our reality as we know it right now. This is a highly philosophical topic today. Today I'm going to be dealing with the astrological archetypes and the question of evil. So this is going to bring up a lot of questions and ideas that hopefully we can start to touch on. This is a sort of a response to a recent video that I've seen by a popular YouTube contributor who has been doing a lot of work on Mars, and I have some different ideas. I love this person's work. I'm very much in agreement with a lot of what is being said by this person, and in this school of thought in general. This person is a somebody who comes from the Steiner mystical Christian tradition, which I believe is in many ways excellent. I believe it's doing a great job, or has done a great job, of highlighting a very basic conflict that's been going on in the world for at least hundreds of years, and I would argue thousands of years. Which is the emergence of the what Rudolf Steiner called the eighth sphere. I think Steiner did great work in describing how this materialist scientism, this particular type of maleficence of evil, has arisen in the world, and how and why it has taken hold so strongly in our current age. However, I think there's some more nuance that can be gleaned and added into this situation by stepping away from the mystical Christian ideas for a bit and moving into more basic hermetic and astrological tropes, to try and get a little bit of a different take on this and see if we can perhaps better define what's going on archetypally. The contributor that I'm speaking of, who there's no need to name them, describes the archetypal motivating force behind the eighth sphere as being essentially martial or Martian. So I tend to take, that as being partially true. There is an element of the martial and the Martian within the transhumanist movement, clearly, but I do not believe that is the true essence of what's going on. And I think if we look at Steiner's own description of the eighth sphere and its sort of egregore, which is Ahriman. Ahriman was you can go very deep into the history of the name Ahriman and what that character meant. It goes back into ancient Persian mythology. You know, you had the various forces. There was basically a tripartite god, and that was in the Zoroastrian tradition. You have the Mithras, you have the Ahura Mazda, and you have Ahriman. I believe those are the three main actors in this tripartite and sort of pantheist ideology or cosmology. And Ahriman was basically the cold and the dark and the force of congealing and capturing of human consciousness. So let me back up just a little bit here. So if we're talking about mystical Christianity, we have mystical Christianity would tend to put the Christ consciousness into opposition with Ahriman, where this our Christ figure is the what opposes Ahriman in Ahriman's basically world domination plans. You have those two factors locked into some sort of eternal battle. This sort of is problematic for me because I don't see most mystical Christians placing Christ, at least not overtly, into one of the archetypal roles. If you were to look at them, astrologically, you'd have to probably put Christ into the solar deity category. That is often, to categorize Christ and to put him into some sort of, categories that constrain the what might be considered the eternal goodness of this archetype. I feel like that's sort of a block amongst mystical Christian thinkers. But I think it's something we have to do, and I don't think it actually is a negative thing to bring the Christ consciousness into that sort of framework, because otherwise we can get really lost if we don't understand the energetics of our all of the actors, so to speak, in this conflict, if you will. So there's this brings into in ideas of Gnosticism and other dualistic or actually ultimately non-dualistic type of thinking. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole too far today, but my basic idea here is that if we don't define what the Christ consciousness is, we don't really know what it is, and if we don't know what that is, we don't really know that that is going to be the antidote entirely to this Ahrimanic eighth sphere egregore. So yeah, that's what I would love to see more thought put into what the Christ consciousness means. I think it's pretty clear, and a lot of authors have said this, that the Christ consciousness is a solar, basically a solar archetype. What is the solar archetype? You can go into Hermeticism, astrology, and find out what that means. It's masculine. It's hot, but it's not extremely hot. It is transcendent versus immanent. It's a nurturing but masculine force. Some traditional societies would call the sun a feminine archetype, which is also perfectly valid in a lot of ways. It's not something we necessarily need to argue out or have one answer for. For example, the Germanic and Norse people described the sun goddess with the symbol was the swastika, and the force was feminine. It was a goddess Suna. So that is we don't need to say one of these ideas is necessarily correct or incorrect, but we should make note that there are a myriad of possibilities to where to place these basic archetypes. So getting into astrology now, if we're going to look at the way astrology deals with malefic archetypes, and by malefic we get into a lot of nuance here. So malefic versus evil is a basic contrast between astrology or astrological thought and the more Christian, more monotheistic ideas. Maleficence is a tendency towards extremes. So in astrology, you have two potential, two malefic forces that are locked in eternal conflict in in the astrological thinking, or at least these archetypes kind of sit on the cutting edge of being the most destructive. When they come into contact with each other in the skies by angle or in conjunction or in most any way, pretty much, they are most likely to cause problems for us, according to astrological thinking. You can see this in what's called electional astrology, where you choose times for to launch, a project, to launch a business, to do, get married, to do any of these things that require favorable skies. And when you have the moon, especially, being besieged by one or the other or both of the malefic archetypes, Saturn and Mars, traditional astrologers will tell you don't do it. Do not start your venture when the moon is being essentially besieged or attacked by these two forces, especially when she's caught in the crossfire between the two of them. That's a time when you should be laying low and not starting new things. So what does that tell us right there? That tells us that the moon is the most creative force. It's the sort of the midwife to reality. It's that which can bring things into existence, into our realm. When she is experiencing extreme heat, which is the martial maleficence, then things will tend to blow up. They might tend to turn into some sort of acute inflammatory condition, or a literal fire, or some sort of violent action, something that causes a rapid and excessively hot occurrence. So when Saturn is the primary force that is besieging the moon, then you will get an extreme cold situation. So what we have here is, so as I said, if we put our our Christ consciousness as being the sort of the antidote to this situation, where does that lie on this spectrum of extreme heat and extreme cold? The sun does lie in between, according to ancient astrology, and this type of thinking. So we've got something there that we can start to introduce that figure into our basic elemental construct. So to go a little further into this, into these basic archetypal ideas, astrology shows us at certain points during the year that we have, specifically the equinoxes. We have the Aries. We see the sun becomes exalted. So this is the dignity scheme in ancient astrology. We have the Aries season starts with the spring equinox, and Mars rules the Aries time, when Aries and Mars are expressions of extreme individuation. They're expressions of extreme the extreme heat that's required in order for life to be jump-started out of the winter, essentially. So Mars archetype is functional and desirable at the time of the equinox, when this sort of extreme heat is welcomed. Like we want to see this the shoots coming up from the ground. So Mars is also the Mars symbol is it's a circle with an arrow emerging from it. So that is a direct symbol of the life force emerging from its wintry, collectivized, unindividuated, earthbound place. So Mars, as the traditional god of spring, is actually, in this, if we understand this archetype to be functional, to not just be evil, but to be functional and have its place within the year, and this function of the archetype is to move the life force along its path. So, as I've said probably in some previous videos, this is video number 5. I've done 4 before this. I believe I've mentioned that the archetypes are defined primarily by their relationship to the goddess, and the goddess is the life force itself. It is creation itself. So Mars energy, Mars actions are appropriate in the springtime. If we get away from this earthbound, seasonal-bound construction of what these archetypes do, and we put them into some sort of virtual, idealized, or moralistic type of framework, which, and I'm not saying there's something wrong with moralizing on this, because there is every reason to believe there's a moral backbone to the universe. But if we disconnect it from the seasonal understanding of these archetypes, we take the chance of running the archetype out of Dodge, so to speak. We attach we put the red letter on it, and we try and get it out of our out of our understanding of a functional planet and functional reality for us, which is inextricably linked to the seasons and to the function of the year. So we need to avoid that. We need to understand that Mars is in fact functional in this Aries time, and he's also functional in Scorpio season in mid-fall, which, as I write this, or excuse me, as I speak these words, we are in Scorpio season under Mars rule. So there we go. So Mars is a functional archetype, and he rules the beginning of spring. And there's an interesting thing that happens in ancient astrology where the sun becomes exalted in Aries. So the sun, as our our nurturing masculine, basic masculine energy, is said, we can have a feminine side to that, absolutely. But specifically in astrology, we ascribe the sun to what's called the day sect, and that's there's 2 sects of planets that they all belong to one sect or the other, and Mercury kind of divides its time between those 2 sects. And the sun is the sort of the emperor of the day sect, and the day sect is what speaks mostly to the daytime reality that we have to deal with, the masculine world, the productive world, the world of planning, of religion, of government, of the things that how we direct our lives, and how we organize ourselves in order to create a societal construct, so to speak. So the sun is a ruler of that, but he's combined with Mars in Aries, and it's my contention that we see these 2 forces, the martial and the excuse me, the solar, being sort of a hybrid of archetype. The 2 of them together are a fused Sun King archetype that is rules the spring and the summer seasons, in which the life force is extroverted from the ground. It is focused on upward growth. It is therefore more masculine. The winter is more psychological. It's more inward. The summer and spring are more outward, extroverted, and productive, and also that is when we we grow things. This is when we life force is entering the parts of the above ground parts of the tree of life, so to speak, which is also the zodiac, which it is a tree, and the tree. When we're looking at the tree, we're watching through the seasons how the life force comes, out of the ground and into the trunk, and new shoots come out in the springtime, versus the wintertime in temperate climates where there is a winter, when the life force is heading backwards into and going into the root, and that's where it's staying, and the outward world becomes more homogenized and collectivized, where there's outward growth is dangerous, and to the if you send up a shoot in the middle of winter, it's likely that the energy from that shoot is going to deplete the root and put the entire organism into a place of energetic deficit and possibly risking death. So we have our sort of this fused martial and solar archetype for the spring and the summer, and we see in Libra, as the sun passes along the across the equinoctial point into Libra, we find that Saturn is exalted there along with Venus. So Venus and Mars are polarized to one another. They are the sort of the mating couple. They are the intemperate masculine heat that starts the relationship, that goes out and seeks. The solar is not necessarily something that's going out and seeking. It is temperate, it sustains. And you can see that in astrology because it rules the sign of Leo, which is a fixed sign. It does not rule any other signs. Mars rules Aries, which is a cardinal sign, which is about starting things, starting spring with the this masculine insemination of fire into the cool and wet ground, which that's also a psychological metaphor. So we have these, as I said, the martial and the solar are paired together for those two seasons, and then in Libra the Saturnian and the Venusian come together for the winter, the fall and winter months. So when you look at it this way, you can see that there is a sort of this natural affinity for the solar and the martial, because the martial allows the solar to sort of conquer more territory, so to speak, to actually assert itself in a way that the solar does not necessarily do. The solar is a nurturing. It stays, but it does not. I mean, in reality, the sun does send out flares, and they are pretty extreme, so to speak. But astrologically speaking, those flares are a martial emission, so to speak, of the solar. So in the wintertime, in the fall and the winter, we have this natural affinity of the Venusian, which is again, that's cool and moist. She's sort of the if you want to think of it as being the typical tripartite feminine archetype, the Venusian kind of sits with the maiden, if you'll go there. The moon is sort of the motherly archetype, and that leaves us with the crone, and who is mysteriously not represented in any of these planetary archetypes. However, it's quite easy to see that Saturn is actually the crone. Saturn, even though he wears a male face in tradition, his first, shall we say, defining action in mythology was the castration of Uranus, who was the sky god who represented the entirety of the day sect. All of the masculine attributes were sort of represented by Uranus in his primordial masculinity. And Gaia, or G, or however you'd like to say the name of the Earth goddess, was there was just a pairing of these two of these, and there was no subcategories at that point. These were as of yet undelineated. There were just two forces, sort of the yin and the yang of the universe, in a very basic primordial marriage. So the Saturn creation story was that the Saturn was enlisted by his mother Gaia to castrate Uranus when he had cast her, or their children, the giants, the Hecaton Kyres, into Tartarus. The entirety of Saturn's active or inactive meanings all stem from this. He castrates, he emasculates. He is a member of the Day sect, but he is the dissenting voice within the Day sect. He is the force that sits at the very edge of the visible solar system, and he's basically the gatekeeper to everything that is beyond that. He's the slowest, he's the darkest, he's the coldest. He's still an active force, but he's an active force for the protection of the goddess, the mother goddess, the great goddess, who is Gaia. So he is the proxy for the great goddess when she needs to, or believes she needs to, emasculate the masculine, to keep it from overextending itself. So without casting any sort of, moralizing or, questioning whether that was right or wrong to castrate Uranus, that is what happened. And that is the underlying meaning of Saturn. So there we see we see in that the myth there that Saturn has an affinity for the feminine. Saturn protects the feminine. So if we go back to our tree of life metaphor, Saturn is the root. Saturn is the deep winter. He rules Capricorn, which is the winter's beginning just after you cross the equinoctial point of usually in the 20th through the 22nd of December into winter, from fall into winter, where the sun starts to grow in its strength. So Saturn rules this time, this deep, dark, cold time when the life force is retreated entirely in the northern hemisphere into the root, or even if it's not entirely, that is primarily where it is. So Saturn defends the root. Saturn's got a very a noble and necessary function to protect what they call in the Orphic hymns, or some translations of the Orphic hymns, the root fire of humanity. He protects us in our most vulnerable place, and that for that reason, he protects the mother. That's his entire reason for being. So what we have now, we can see that we have two kind of meta archetypes of the feminine, which is sort of the fused Saturnian with the Venusian, and just to go a little bit further into that, the feminine, basic feminine energy is dark. It's retreat, it's passivity, it's receptivity. It is much more oriented towards the Saturnian archetypes. So the place where this becomes problematic is that Saturn can become, his job is to emasculate the masculine, to take away excessive masculine impulse, which is why we see this great conflict in the skies between the intemperate heat of Mars, who's always wanting to assert masculinity. That's just what he does. And if you're going to start attributing to him these more unindividuating and more feminine aspects, then we start to have a problem like that. The logic of this kind of falls apart. If we want to attribute, all of scientific materialism to Mars, and to not see that this is actually something that kind of sits more squarely in the Saturnian impulse than the martial. It's got aspects of both. That's where it gets confusing. If we look at so just to move back again, so we hopefully have established here that we have two basic pairings. We have the Saturnian and the feminine, and we have the martial and the solar. This doesn't mean that they're necessarily, things are messy, and these planets are always, these archetypes are always influencing each other, and they're always sort of either in conflict, or on their way out of conflict, or they're in agreement. Anytime a planet conjoins another planet in the same sign, there's this basic level of agreement about what energetic those planets are living under. So if you have even the two malefics in the same sign, they are kind of bound to put their energy into working with the energy of that sign, not in some other, they have their own agendas and they're still going to fight likely, but there is going to be an aspect of agreement energetically around that particular, the functional meaning of that sign. But then when you get into other aspects like a sextile, there's a sort of a more friendly, potentially no need to fight necessarily between the planets. Then you get into a square, and that is a martial aspect in which there something has to resolve. It's it's the most conflicted of the relationships that there is in astrology. So when you see a square in the sky of Saturn and Mars, then there's where something has got to give. Essentially, one of the two of them is going to have to triumph. And astrology gives us a lot of the reasons, that which direction the wind's going to blow, and that whether there's that kind of conflict. So there we have that. So we've got like a natural affinity for the martial and the solar. We have a natural affinity for the Saturnian and the feminine. And if we're going to talk about transhumanism now, so we need to then answer the question of where does transhumanism lie on this whole spectrum. And it's my argument that this transhumanism is a homogenizing, anti-human, anti-individuating movement. It does not want to see humans able to make their own decisions outside of what is spoon-fed to them by technocratic hierarchy. This is an ultimately extremely controlling movement that seeks to eliminate disagreement among humans, to sort of create a utopia by attrition, by taking away all of the messy things about humanity that would disagree with those who proclaim authority and power. That is, by definition, Saturnian. That is not martial. If you want to say, Mars can flip on a dime and become Saturnian, I believe that is actually the case, that there is one place in the zodiac which is sort of mysterious, according to in ancient dignity scheme, that the Mars becomes exalted in the sign of Capricorn. So Mars, whose really ultimate goal is to individuate, who was trying to break free out of the forces, the feminizing forces that would get rid of individuation. That and when I'm talking about feminine forces, these are not functional or good feminine forces. These are the Saturnian forces that would go off the rails towards the ultimate collectivization and homogenization of humanity. But as I said, Mars does become exalted in Capricorn, and I think that is indicating something very, really particular, sinister within the zodiac. That this martial impulse is actually subject to a capture by Saturnian forces. That the Saturnian, which much more resemble the Ahrimanic topography, it's the heavy, like concrete, I think is what Steiner said of Ahriman, that it's like stone, it's solidifying, it's stultifying, it puts the kibosh on creativity. It's a very, very, very Saturnian cold force. So how does this happen? How does Mars get captured essentially by the Saturnian impulse? Well, if you look at it as the Mars being sort of individuating, and therefore it's like the young man. It's the young person who wants to continually break through the conditioning, break through the parental authority to constantly assert oneself. So this is basically, Mars symbol is again, it's the it's a circle, which is the womb essentially being penetrated and left by this individuated, willful force. So if you were to imagine that there was another womb around this inner womb, you draw another circle around the Mars symbol, and that's sort of what we get when we're talking about the Mars capture. It's as if there was like the wintertime Capricorn, things are cold, so Mars can basically put off as many explosives as he wants. He can nobody's going to complain too much about a little bit of excess heat in the winter. The metaphor for Capricorn and the and Aquarius especially is, again, it's the energy being in the root, and it's also a very defensive situation. So Saturn could be thought of as being defending, as I said, defending the root. It's the keep. It's the Magda. It's the place of the goddess, the place where she can be defended most easily. So Mars there actually has an incredible amount of power, because this is the Mars in his most cold and steely and calculating, calm state. The wintertime, there is basically no, in this horticultural metaphorical framework, the wintertime is not when things are mating. It's not when the pollen's out blowing around. It's not, things are happening underground. So any of the sort of the sexual impulse that Mars indicates is subterranean and very controlled because of that. So this is Mars in a particular degree of efficiency and capacity that he might not have elsewhere, because in other places he's going to be engaged with the Venusian in a the outward battle of the sexes, whereas in Capricorn he is in a psychological and inward battle. Mars tends to speak more towards the physical than towards the psychological, but that's also that's sort of subverted also by the fact that he is the ruler of perhaps the most fraught psychological space in the zodiac, which is Scorpio, which is a very that is when the life force is heading back downwards towards the root, and the sort of that life force wants to clean itself, wants to make sure that it's not bringing toxins down into the root where they could cause rot. So Mars' job in Scorpio is to eliminate the toxins, and Mars, Scorpio is also related to the sexual organs on humans and all creatures. So it's that part of it's a very sexual place, but it's much more the internal workings and the purification of those systems, making sure that the water is clear, and doing what's necessary to make that happen. And doing what's necessary, in conflicted situations often doesn't make friends, or it's not necessarily it doesn't make for a pleasant or nurturing time. So that's a little bit of Mars in this in this winter time is outside of the he's not engaged in the battle of the sexes in the same way as he is in the outward world. And in the outward world, it requires a lot more physical energy. So hopefully that gives you some ideas as to why this what I'm describing, the martial being sort of captured by the Saturnian is that's at least my interpretation of how you can start to understand why Mars is exalted there in Capricorn. So also, when you ever see a planet is exalted in a certain sign, you have to go across the zodiac to its opposite to find out where they're going to be in their so-called fall. And that would, of course, be Cancer. So, and it's not hard to see why excessive martial energy in a sign that is most associated with childbearing children, the state of childhood, the hypnagogic state that children are in, bonding to their mother, that's all very Cancerian. So you have sort of a situation where Mars is like an unwelcome heat wave in the middle of summer towards the pregnant Cancerian moon that is not really enjoying a heat wave or inflammation or any of these things that can really excessively emotional times to Mars tends to cause emotional upset. So Cancer is that is where this martial impulse is, even though it's a masculine time of year where there is in fact mating going on. There's things are growing, abundance. It's the outward and upward expansion of energy, which is absolutely where Mars is most comfortable. But that doesn't mean people exactly really want him around at certain times. So there we go. That's a bit of some ideas around why we might want to look a bit more carefully at what the eighth sphere might mean in astrological and my interpretation anyway of Hermetic understanding of these basic elements. I do believe that we need to understand that these malefics are not necessarily they can result in evil. They can result in anti-life psychologies and anti-life actions. Mars is considered, as I said, the lesser of the malefics because the heat generally tends to go out. You know, it's like it takes too much energy to expend, you know, to create this kind of martial explosion that Mars tends to, you know, go in fits and starts. It doesn't really operate the same way Saturn, which Saturn is, you know, associated. They're both associated with death, but Mars is associated with death by, you know, a car accident or, you know, a war, a violent interaction versus Saturn, which is death by old age and grinding and diminution, chronic conditions versus inflammatory conditions. So, yeah, astrology gets to the core of the issue, which is the basically evil comes down to excessive cold and excessive heat. At least its methodology does, but it's you know, what characterizes evil is the hatred for or the desire to undermine and subvert life itself. When humanity in large swaths takes on eugenic ideas of eugenics, where they've accepted the idea that people need to die in order to protect the mother, that needs to be looked at very, very, very carefully. Humanity does not often understand in the collective sense when it's being told that its mother, you know, Mother Earth is under threat. We have ancestral trauma wired into us that tends to make us take that very seriously. And if we have people nowadays that every time there's a heat wave, when there's, you know, when it's supposed to be cold, they think that it's, you know, some sort of something's going wrong with the planet that we've caused. That is problematic because the sun and Earth have this relationship, and the sun puts out these flares, the Martial flares, as I mentioned, you know, Martial emissions, and that is actually what causes the planet to heat up or cool down if there's a lack of those. It's the relationship between the sun and the Earth, which you get back to more like this Gaia and Uranus sort of relationship, a very basic, you know, yin and yang thing, and it's programmed into us to believe that it's our fault when something you know, seems like it's going wrong, even if it's a massive part of a larger cycle of heating and cooling that can be documented over the course of centuries and millennia. People are quite ready to believe that they are the cause of the Earth's demise. So this is a type of apocalypticism that is part of human psychology that every generation practically has you know, been prey to in one way or another. That every generation believes that they're going to see the end of the planet, that it's all over, that we're, you know, we're going down in flames or a flood or any number of other ways, you know, volcanoes, earthquakes. And these things have happened before, let there be no question about it. There have been catastrophes, and there will be catastrophes that will cause us to go into the Saturnian mode of retreat into our root of basically protecting humanity. So this is the Saturnian impulse to retreat to the root, to defend the root, to defend the keep, and to be, you know, like, I don't care who dies, I don't care, you know, there's too many people on the planet, some people have to die, it's just, you know, that's just the way it is. That is really a deeply Saturnian, deeply fraught human psychological condition. So what I'm getting at here is that these two malefics have not only outward and extroverted implications of heat and of extreme cold, extreme heat, extreme cold. They have psychological implications, and these psychological implications can be mapped on the zodiac. So that is where my work is going, and it's hopefully this will help people to get a little bit more perspective on the I agree with mystical Christianity in very, very many ways. However, I prefer to bring things down to a more elemental level, that we have to be circumspect and understanding those forces that we consider to be the savior, or those that will, we can summon forth within us in order to fight any evil or break any spell, so to speak. I think we need to be really careful to understand our saviors and where they sit on an elemental continuum, and to be sure that we don't overlook that. And everything has got its place in this continuum. This is not a denial of Christianity or of all the benefits that it brings to people when it does. But yes, this is a basically elemental and unbiased way of looking, hopefully, at how archetypes actually manifest in the world. So I'm going to be dealing with Jupiter and Mercury, as I've promised in a previous video. I'm also going to be doing a video on Hermeticism and astrology specifically, and how and why I believe those ideologies, cosmologies, are incredibly, really kind of inextricable. That you need to at least understand Hermeticism to get your astrology to be on par, because that's kind of where it came from. That's its roots. So that's it for right now. Hopefully I've explained this all well. It's a rather wordy and complicated and nuanced area to talk about, but that's it for now. If you have any questions, feel free to ask any, and I'll try and get back to you. My website is michaelmsuter.com, and you can get information on this page about how to contact me for astrological consultation. My website has a ton of blog entries that deal, and there is actually a blog entry that deals with Saturn and Mars, and trying to delineate these two malefics, because they are basically the cutting edge of the the razor's edge of the battle of the sexes, so to speak. How these basic yin yang, male female, in their most elemental form, are going to tend to manifest, and what weapons they'll be using essentially can be seen with the martial and the Saturnian strategies. And that's it for today.